Hi, I'm Niles Lund, and in this video I'll show you how to make an in-camera test strip which will save loads of time when you're trying to determine a proper wet plate exposure. Most folks think of test strips as having a series of exposures, with each consecutive exposure incrementing by the same amount of time. That's okay, but it covers a relatively narrow window of exposure times and won't give you all the information you'll really find useful. If we put a little thought behind it, we can really make our test strips sing. To begin with, everything in photography, from aperture settings to shutter speeds, are based on factors of 2. Each factor of 2 is called a stop. So if everything on your camera is based on stops, why not have a test plate that corresponds to the same settings? That's the magic of this method. Each strip differs from its neighbors by one stop of exposure. The first thing to do is to divide the Darkslide into 5 portions. You can guesstimate it on the fly, or you can mark out lines on the back, as I've done. Then we need to make a rough estimate of what we think the right exposure might be. Let's say we think it'll be in the neighborhood of 8 seconds. We'll divide this by 2, and then divide the result by 2 again. This gives us 2 seconds. This is our base exposure. Now, load a plate into the plate holder, place it in the camera, open the Darkslide as if we're going to take a normal photograph, and then expose the entire plate to one base exposure, or 2 seconds. Put the lens cap back on the camera and close the Darkslide by 1/5. Expose again for one base exposure, another 2 seconds. Close the Darkslide by 1/5 and expose again for 2 times the base exposure, or 4 seconds. Close the Darkslide by another 1/5 and expose again for 4 times the base exposure, or 8 seconds. Finally, close the Darkslide by another 1/5 and expose for 8 times the base exposure, or 16 seconds. Close the Darkslide completely and process the plate. If we look at the total exposure time for the plate, the first strip has an exposure of 2 seconds, the next 4 seconds, then 8, then 16, and finally 32 seconds, each one having twice the exposure of the previous strip. Presto! Each strip is one stop different in exposure from its neighbors. If our original guesstimate was close, we should have a pretty good exposure near the middle of the plate. If we were off a little bit, we can easily figure out what it should be, and knowing that each strip differs by one stop, we can also make good guesses for intermediate values as well. Try it out. Once you get used to it, I think you'll find it indispensable when setting up in a new location or when you're just not quite sure of the lighting. Thanks for watching.